Okay. Plus and minus. Yep. Why is it so hard? Does everybody identify with why it is so hard? It's a question that a lot of people ask. Why is it so hard to get up this hill? Why is it so hard? So there are a few things in Apache that are hard, and some are easy. Anybody know anything that's easy? That's what I thought. Okay, it's not easy being in Apache, but it doesn't have to be so hard either. Let's see if this works. On. Okay, I'll have to do it this way. Why is it so hard to use the equipment? Yeah, that's a difficult one. Okay, so I'm not sure why you're all here, but I'm here to entertain you, so if I'm not being entertaining, please let me know. I joined Apache many years ago. It's about, 20-some years ago, and I've been enjoying it ever since. So I like to call myself the board chair emeritus because I served one term as the board chair, and now I'm just watching from the sidelines. So we're here to talk about ASF rules because there are rules and we have to follow the rules. But once you understand how Apache works, hopefully it'll be a lot easier to figure out why there are some rules and why you need to follow them. So the rules are possibly hard to do things. So we have rules to, I have to do this? Okay, I'll do this also so we get the full Apache. Okay, the rules make it a little hard to do things, but the rules are there for a reason. And hopefully if you understand the reason why the rules are there, it makes it easier to follow them. Not always the case, but it should make it easier to follow them. Okay. Watching the translation here, and it's good. Okay. The speed is good, yeah. Yeah, I like to speak slowly, even if I could speak very quickly, so get the point across. Okay, so what is the ASF? The ASF is 26-year-old institution. Minor editing there. It is a public charity which has rules that are set by the United States government, so we can't just arbitrarily do anything we want to. As a 501c3 charity, I know that's a lot of words, but it means a very specific thing in the United States tax system, which we have to abide by. And it is a community with a large number of projects, 300 some projects. Every month the number of projects changes. And sometimes it changes in the middle of the month, sometimes it waits until the end of the month to change, but it's always going, and usually it's going up, but sometimes it goes down, but it's always changing. So I just say about 300 projects, about 800 members, and about 9,000 committers. I should have put the tick there to make it clear that it's 9,000 and not 90,000 or 900. And we never tried to count the number of users. So I just say they are uncountable number of users. So what does the ASF do? What is our mission? It is to provide software, and this is sort of legalese. Legally, we provide software for the public good, free of charge, free to use, modify, distribute, and sublicense. So what that means is that, has anyone heard of the Apache license? No? Apache license? Hopefully, Apache license. It's what we call a permissive license. And what it means is it satisfies the requirements of the OSI that say, if your license does this and this and this, then it's a good license. It's an open source license. And that's very important. It's an open source license. And permissive means that if you acknowledge where the software came from, you can do almost anything you want to with it. We don't have things like you can't build nuclear stuff with it, which is something that former licenses used to do. Then they discovered that that was almost unenforceable because whoever was building the nuclear stuff with the software didn't tell you anyway. So it didn't really make any sense. Okay, so the governance model, how does the ASF govern itself? It's staffed by volunteers at every level of the organization. The board of directors, the chair of the board of directors, they're all volunteers. The vice presidents, they're volunteers. Everybody is a volunteer until you come down to where you have time-critical things that need to be done, like if your server goes down, you need to fix it. And you can't rely on a volunteer to fix it because they're on vacation. And you can't say, hey, come off vacation and come fix the server. So we have people who are being paid to manage the infrastructure. And that's pretty much the extent of the paid personnel. So we have then the most important part is the project management committees. And I'll show you a little picture of what this really looks like. And I apologize for this slide. I couldn't find a font small enough to represent 300 PMCs. Okay, so you'll have to bear with me. We have one board of directors, have 9 people. We have one president, and there are about a dozen, less than a dozen VPs for individual responsibilities, legal responsibilities, who report to the president. And we have a few VPs that report directly to the board, but they're almost insignificant. And then you have a large number of PMCs. So the actual governance of the foundation is really left up to the PMCs with very minor oversight by the board. I mean, important oversight, but it's oversight by the board. And as you can imagine, the board of directors having to manage 300 projects, it's a little bit of a challenge. So before you decide to become a director, just understand that there's a lot of projects out there, and you need to actually take a look at each one on a regular basis and say, are you doing the right thing for the community and for your folks? Okay, so ASF is safe, reliable, trustworthy. Users trust ASF software. The contributors, once you've signed a contract, your contributions to the ASF are protected by a legal shield. And legal means that no one is going to sue you and say, give me $1 million. Or in today's environment, give me $10 billion because you did something bad. As long as you have signed this agreement, your contributions are protected by a legal shield. Legal meaning that if somebody decides to sue you, they can't. They're going to sue the ASF. And the ASF, nobody wants to sue the ASF, let's be real. And the downstream users, they use the software, they distribute the software, they rely on the permissive license to have legal authority to distribute that software. Okay, and that's really important. You have to know where your stuff comes from in order to be able to make money distributing it to others. So the project management committees, that's the key to this whole operation. They set the project direction, they manage the repositories, they don't actually turn the crank to make sure that they stay up, that's infra, but they do manage the content. And they do build, test, release, they do GitHub actions, they do all this stuff. to make sure that the software actually works. And they are responsible for voting in new PMC members. They're responsible for voting in new committers, and they must vote on software releases. You say, why do they have to vote? Well, we'll get into that. Why do you vote? And legally, what happens is that the ASF as a foundation has responsibilities to the public, and the PMCs, if they take a vote and they get an affirmative vote, then the ASF says this is an act of the foundation. The foundation is legally responsible for these actions if the PMC takes a vote. So what do they need to do? They need to document the PMC decisions, and they need to be binding. Binding is a very specific term of art. I don't know if you have that concept in China. The term of art, binding is a legal term that we use in the ASF. And binding means you're binding the foundation to the decision that you take with the vote. So it's very important to understand that there are binding decisions that are made by binding votes. Okay? So let's do the first thing. It is so hard to become a committer. And this one is really true. It is so hard to become a committer because each of the PMCs has their own rules for becoming a committer. Some project management committees, some PMCs, they say, we really love contributions, we're going to make lots of people committers, and if you can find one of those projects and contribute a few things, you'll probably become a committer. There are other PMCs that say, our stuff is so important, we can't let anybody be a committer. And that's what we call a high committer bar. Because if you say, how do I become a committer? Well, you have to jump over this bar. And some PMCs say, here's the bar. Some other say, you have to jump this high. How can I possibly jump that high? Some PMCs say, you have to be a contributor for at least a year and a half or 2 years. You have to have so many pull requests approved. You have to have so many lines of code. You have to have a majority of PMC members saying that we want to have you join the community. It's very difficult. So this is the one case where I can say, yes, it's very hard to become a committer. But there's nothing I can do about it or you can do about it. It depends on the PMC. So the best way to do it is to find a community that says, we like people to contribute and we want to make you committers. Now, how do you do that? You read the mail lists and you find out what are the criteria that this PMC uses. And you can do that because they're usually pretty open about it. And if you find a PMC that says our bar is a year and a half to 2 years, 50 pull requests, then you can say, that's pretty tough. I'll have to talk to my boss about that. And there are others that are easier. But in order to be a committer, generally, you have to have a consistent set of contributions of high quality. You need to participate in the mail lists with respect for others. And then high committer bar, it's your choice whether you want to try to join that community or not. And as I said, each PMC is different. Your PMC, good luck finding a PMC. Hopefully the reason you're joining is because you like the technology or you like the idea of contributing. Okay, so it is really hard to onboard new committers. Now this one is not quite as difficult because this is really up to the PMC. And the PMC has rules, and like I said, some have very high committer bars, some not so much. But in order to become a committer, in order to onboard these new committers, you basically need to discuss why some person who nominates this person for committership You have to discuss why you think that's a good idea. And they check all the boxes for becoming a new committer. Okay, then you discussing, and where does the discussion happen? Any ideas where the discussion of new committers happens? It happens on email. On what list? The private list. Because we think that it may be embarrassing if somebody says, I think this person should be a committer, and somebody says, oh, I've reviewed their PRs, they're terrible. We don't want that to be public. We want to keep it private until the point that there's a consensus among the PMC members that this person would be a good committer. Once there's consensus, then you have a vote, and if there is a successful vote, you invite the committer, and then, this is a hard part, the ICA filing, ICLA, that's a committer or a contributor license agreement, and we'll get into that. But once that's filed, pretty much the rest is really easy. Okay, so how do you fill an ICLA form? Everybody knows what the ICLA is, and nobody knows how to fill it out because it's not obvious just looking at it what you're supposed to do with this thing. So, rule number 1, only humans. Yeah, well, we have people who pretend to be human and they're really not, but we don't have a little diagram to say which is the chicken and which is the duck. We don't have those kinds of things, but we do have to have some evidence that they're human, and mostly it's because the PMC invited them. That's the biggest thing. But there is a little bit about some personally identifiable information, also known as PII. We do collect a tiny bit of PII, and that's part of the idea of only human, because mostly bots do not have residence addresses, and they can fake it, but we don't really care. Anyway, we need you to say what your public name is, and the public name is not your GitHub ID. So don't even go there. Your public name usually is the name that's associated with your email address. And so if you submit an ICLA from George McCracken, skillbuzz@gmail.com, and try to get skillbuzz as your public name, no. As long as you're known in public by this name, that's your public name. And you can fake it. I mean, if you're George McCracken Jr., and you say G. McCracken, that's fine. But we're not going to take a GitHub ID as a public name. The postal address, there was a guy who decided postal address was the right terminology instead of just address, but it's actually your personal residence address. And it's where you live, not where you have your mail sent, because you can send your mail to Gmail. That doesn't really qualify. The thing is signature. If you have a signature, we want either a wet signature, that ring a bell, wet signature, or you can actually use with a pen. With a pen, or you can actually make a signature, store it as a GIF, and then use a form filler to drag that GIF onto the form, and that's perfectly fine. As long as you say, a year later, you say, does this look like your signature? Yes, that's you. Okay, so you need a signature. It's not okay to just sign it with a script font. The secretary can tell the difference between a real wet signature and a script font. It'll be rejected if it's just a script font. There are other things like DocuSign. DocuSign is fine. We're not going to officially say that, but DocuSign is fine as long as there's a 12-digit code that says if you go to DocuSign, this code, that's the person who signed it. That's fine. or you can use a GPG signature. And then if you're invited as a committer and you have a specific Apache ID that you would like, put it on the form and put the project on the form also. If you have those two things and you've been voted in as a committer, it takes a few days and you're then a committer. If you leave these things off, if you leave off the ASF ID or the project, the secretary is going to file it, and then it's up to you as a committer to go chase up the project and say, hey, I submitted this thing. Well, did you put the project and the ASF ID on the form? Well, no, I didn't think that was necessary. Well, yeah, you should do it. Okay, so what about new PMC members? PMC membership is part of the governance of the foundation. So it's really important that you know who you're inviting as a PMC member. And you recall that only PMC members can vote in new PMC members. So you need to trust the person that you're inviting as a new PMC member. You need to have respect for them. You need to have them act responsibly on the mail lists. They don't necessarily have to be super coders or super documentation experts. They just have to be people that you trust to make decisions for the community as a whole, and therefore for the Apache Foundation as a whole. So you need to trust these people. And it's actually a lot easier than it sounds. You just need to discuss them, again, on the private list. You discuss and say, Justin would make a good PMC member. What do you guys think? He's done this and this and this. He's been part of the Apache local community for years, months. Anyway, we trust him to do the right thing. You have a vote, you invite them, and then you record that, and there's tools that are used that allow you to say, yeah, make this person a PMC member after the vote has been recorded. And it's really as easy as that. Okay, this is probably the hardest thing, and it sounds so easy. You just decide on the content to make a release. Now, a release is a very specific thing in Apache. A release is not a GitHub release. A release is an actual source code release, and it has to follow certain rules. And the rules are that it has to have a signature, it has to have a checksum, it has to be an artifact that actually has source code in it in order to be called a release. So there are a couple of things, basic things. The content and release manager. You have to have a release manager. You have to have somebody to say, hey, this doesn't work, make changes to it, and you can't have the whole community making the changes. There's probably one person who's going to make those changes. And that person creates a release candidate. Release candidate basically says, here's a bunch of bits, and the bits have a checksum, and the bits have a signature, or two, or as many signatures as you want, but the minimum is one. And the signature should be verified by other PMC members, although we don't enforce that. So it has to have an artifact with source code in it and a whole bunch of things in it. It has to have license information and so forth. And generally, although it's not strictly required, you need to be able to build something from that source. Not strictly required, but it's often useful to have code that actually can compile. And once you create the release candidates, you publish that and just to the community, and then you have the community vote on it. And then often you'll have a whole number of community members, not necessarily PMC members, but community members who will vote on the release. And then if you get enough binding votes, here's that binding thing again. The binding votes are made by PMC members. It's nice to have a whole bunch of community members voting on it also, But the important thing is you have to have binding votes from PMC members. You have to have 3 of them at least, and you have to have more plus ones than minus ones. So it's a relatively easy thing to do. The main time you'd have a minus one on a release is if you're in the incubator and you have some minor issue with it, then it'll get a minus one. But aside from that, you should really not have much difficulty getting 3 plus ones. The main thing that people don't do is they don't get enough votes. And then they have to ask people, we've had this vote open for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. We don't have enough votes, so please, come back from vacation, vote on this release. And there's a certain number of things you have to do. Not required, but you really should make sure that you can download it, that the checksum is correct, and you can create a directory with the sources in it, that you can build it. Those are all useful things, but there's no specific set of things that you have to do as long as you can vote one. And you repeat the vote until, now, if a vote fails, like it doesn't have enough plus ones, or it has some minus ones that really need to be fixed, you can repeat this as many times as you want to. Yes. So you vote, repeat until you get, and sometimes you'll have the candidate will be called, 2.1.6-RC1, and then that failed, and it's RC2, and that failed, and RC3. And that finally succeeded. Once you have a successful vote, then you can move it to the next step, which is to publish. And the publish is basically moving it into an area of the infrastructure where people can download it from. And then you have to announce it. And there are certain rules about what you have to have in an announcement. But they're mostly make sure that you've got the proper terminology that says, here's an official announcement or release from this project. And of course, there are special rules for podlings. That is, that in the incubator, since the PPMC, the Podling Project Management Committee, has no legal standing as far as the governance is concerned, it's only the Incubator PMC that has the ability to release software. And that Incubator PMC is the IPMC, and in order to release things, you have to have 3 IPMC votes in favor, because that's part of the legal foundation of the governance structure. So the process is a little complicated. First, you have to have a vote on the dev mailing list, that is the developer mailing list that's open to the public, so anybody can see it. And once that release has passed with 3 PPMC votes, then you can go, 0 minutes? 0 minutes left.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Perfect. Okay, once you get 3 PPMC votes, you then go to the Incubator PMC, the IPMC general list, again, general, because it's a public vote. And then if you have to wait 72 hours because rules, and if all of your mentors have voted +1, you're done. You don't need anybody else. It's only in the rare case that your mentors are on vacation, or they're unavailable, or they're not paying attention, that you need the IPMC, somebody other than the project PMC, to vote. And that's the way you get through the podling release. I have a few more slides here so I can skip through a lot of these. Submitting patches. This is something that each PMC should do to make it easy to submit patches, like have a new contributor guidance, part of their web page. They have user documentation that you can check, and good first issues is always a nice thing for a project to have, so that you can encourage contributions from other folks. And brand protection, I could go through this for, maybe I'll make a separate talk on protecting the brand. The main thing is that you need to identify your project in the public as Apache Foo. Not just Foo, not just Apache, but Apache Foo. And whether you protect it with a TM or a register mark is really up to you. But you need to make sure that it's Apache Foo in public. And finally, ASF, just to summarize this whole thing, it's a community of peers. Everybody has a say. Everybody on the public mailing list can chime in. In fact, sometimes people chime in when they really shouldn't be chiming in. And that's up to the community to say, we don't want you to do that. Please do something else with your time. Don't bother us. But we exist to provide for the common good legally. And we welcome everyone who wants to contribute around the world. You don't need to segregate yourself by where you are in the country, where you are in the world. We enjoy having people from everywhere to join us and contribute and basically have fun. So with that, I will thank you for your attention and enjoy the conference.